Let's start off with your questions. What leaves the body anyways? Or is it a dream after all? What leaves the body after all? I would say this. I'd like for something to be leaving the body. Or is it consciousness of some kind? Look, that's the one question that it's completely pointless to talk about. I gave you an example yesterday of how even when you're in the physical world in objective reality, each one of us is in our own world, and everyone explains everything they see around them differently. From that point of view, it's useless to discuss what the phase is. But we can control it, we can use it. What leaves and where it goes, in my view, that's not important, because what's important are the tasks that you can accomplish there. In the end, that's what we should strive for. That's why you have a mandatory plan of action. That is, I'm trying to train you from the beginning not to just go there for some odd reason, but to accomplish tasks of some sort. At first they're primitive and simple, then they get more difficult, and the end goal of an experience is a completed plan of action, a completed task. Maybe the phase is some parallel world, maybe it's somewhere inside the brain, maybe it's something else entirely. Nobody knows for sure, and I can't say what it is for sure either. You know, nobody even knows for sure what the physical world is. Even scientifically speaking, you can't say what physical reality itself is. To talk about the phase and discuss what it is also very difficult, so don't get lost in thought over it. That's not important. What is important is carrying out your tasks. Everyone can figure out the rest for themselves, to each their own. What's most important is to do something the first minute upon awakening. Even if you don't act according to plan, like we discussed yesterday, but you still do something, that might get you results. Clearly, if you follow what we talked about yesterday, your results will be much better. But what also happens, I'll focus on it again right now, is you wake up, haven't regained consciousness yet, and you don't immediately realize what you need to do. Do at least something. That's better than nothing. For dream consciousness techniques, I can give you an example of what recall is and how it works. There's dream recall, where you practice remembering your dreams. When you re-enter your dreams? No, when you remember more of them. Because we usually remember about 5 to 10% of our dreams. Training that recall ability is very easy. There are many techniques. To make a long story short, the simplest and most basic one is when you wake up in the morning and recall everything you dreamed that night. Even if it seems at first that you don't have dreams, you'll still recall 1 or 2 dreams. Then, in the evening before going to bed, you recall them. The next day, you'll remember even more of them. By reinforcing the skill like that, within a week or 2, you'll remember dozens of dreams in the morning, and that recall ability of yours will develop. You'll remember what you normally didn't. As a result, it will lead to having more dreams, which will be more vivid. And then consciousness will activate. That is, one of the main techniques for learning dream consciousness is to simply just recall your dreams. It's probably better to write them down. Well, yeah, because otherwise you'll forget them soon. Right. There's another one where you wake up in the middle of the night or after a dream and write down key words right away in order to recall everything later. That way your memory develops more. I just told you the most primitive method first, but if somebody doesn't get enough sleep, that is, sleeps little, I haven't been getting enough sleep the past year, and that's made it hard for me to enter the phase. Yes, that problem does exist. It's probably one of the main ones. There's a reason I always advise one thing. Say you approach the practice of the phase, lucid dreaming, out-of-body travel, call it what you will, and if your routine is messed up, if you sleep poorly or little, then I highly advise you to sleep in, not to sleep in. To fix your routine and sleep schedule. That applies not only to the practice of the phase. In my view, it applies to everything in life. Somebody comes and says, I sleep 10 to 12 hours. I know there won't be any problems with that person. They'll enter the phase easily. If someone comes and says that they sleep 5 to 6 hours max on some weird schedule at who knows what time intervals, then I'm practically sure they'll run into difficulties. Our first and most important task is to discuss what you attempted today. Whether it was successful or not doesn't matter. We need your attempts. Afterwards, we'll take a break. After the break, we'll go right to discussing deepening, maintaining, and obtaining information. Then, we'll have another break. After the break comes the practical part. We'll finish indirect techniques, add the most important element, and your procedure will be a bit different by tomorrow. And that's why we'll start now by discussing your attempts. How will we proceed? Yesterday, I told you I made a very serious mistake for years. I myself gave people knowledge and helped them find their mistakes. As a result, I remember when we held a practitioner convention in Crimea in Balaclava. About 5 years ago, I suddenly got the idea to ask people to find their mistakes on their own. Nobody could give an answer. There were teachers, about 6 of them. I asked them too. It turned out even the teachers were unable to answer. As it turned out, the whole time I was helping people find their mistakes, I was making them dependent on me and wasn't teaching them to think at all. From then on, I've radically changed my approach. In recent years, the main emphasis during the second and third lessons is to teach you to think. Raise your hand if you made attempts. It doesn't matter if it worked or didn't work, but you tried today. You honestly tried. Okay, good. Now raise your hand if you want to discuss those attempts. It doesn't matter if it worked out or not. You want to discuss it. Aha. Yulia and who else? Andrei. Andrei, you're the teacher. And Yulia, you're the student. Andrei, ask Yulia questions and help her sort through her actions. If it doesn't work out, we'll join in. I dreamed that we were in this classroom and all doing all the techniques that we practiced yesterday. We made attempts. That's when I realized the room wasn't exactly the same as the one we had been in. And so I thought, that means I'm sleeping. Andrei, when somebody realizes they're sleeping, what's that called? Well, they're already lucid. Is that the phase or not? Yes, it is. So as soon as you've realized you're dreaming, that's no longer a dream, it's the phase. Please continue. I started looking for a mirror, but there wasn't one in the room. So I immediately had this plan in my head, find a mirror. But the table was still there. The top of the table was glass, and I took a look. I saw my reflection and figured everything was fine. Then I thought, right, I have to eat something. And I found a bowl of cherries and ate them. But where did you find it? It was nearby on the table. That is, while I looked in the mirror, I already had in mind my next goal, that I needed to eat something right then. And accordingly, I already imagined that when I raised my head, the bowl of cherries would be nearby on the table. And it was. And I ate a cherry. I tasted it. Well, the taste wasn't really like it is in real life. That is, it was really quite bland. This was all like a dream, or was it really vivid, lucid? Did you chew it right in your dream? Yes, I chewed it right there. There was even a pit inside. Then, what you saw on the table and your reflection, what exactly did you see there? Did you see your own reflection, or something else? What was on the glass table? I saw my own reflection. Was it the usual one, like now, that is, a real reflection? More or less, yes. Maybe my hairstyle was a bit different, my clothes were different somehow. But I didn't notice anything strange, as it were. That is, you completed the task. What was next? Next, I went to eat cherries. There was also my personal plan, item 3. But I didn't get there, unfortunately. My dream started coming to an end, and I decided to run faster. There was a door nearby, and I pictured opening it and carrying out my goal. I wanted to look at the Milky Way, at our galaxy from the outside. I was already running to the door when I realized the dream was ending, and I ran out to the door. But what happened? Did you wake up? I didn't wake up. It was more as if the picture faded. Then another dream started, but I wasn't conscious for it. That is, you fell asleep. Yes. Okay. Andrei, do you have any comments or questions? I can't say right now. Okay? Before we ask Andrei a question, Yulia, what about the degree of realism of all those sensations? If we have 100% vividness of perception right now, what was it at that moment? I think it was about 60% that of real life. Okay, Andrei, what is to be done in such a situation? We're talking about the phase when ideally there's 90 to 100% the realism we have right now. But what did Yulia need to do? It seems to me it was necessary to try to touch and feel everything, and then maybe the effect would have intensified. Yulia, did you try something like that? Well, honestly speaking, no. I simply had such limited time and tried to pull as much intensity as possible. That is, for me, my plan lagged behind the dream. That is, emphasis on your plan was greater? Okay, today we'll be discussing how to deepen and stabilize the state. Andre, was it the phase or a dream? What main signs should there be? Seems to me Yulia said she realized it was a dream and that she started to control it herself. Or maybe it just seemed to her she had become conscious. That is, Andre is right to say there should be awareness in the phase. First of all, there should be awareness. If there's not awareness and self-awareness, it's anything but the phase. So what indication from Yulia's story shows that she really had awareness? It seems to me that she had goal-oriented actions. She got a reflection in the mirror. That is, a plan of action. She recalled her plan of action and started to carry it out. Indeed, that is one of the main indications of awareness being there. A person realizes they had a goal and starts to do it. Because if it were a dream, you would be doing everything but what you really want right now. Overall, correct. Okay. Here we've found a difference from dreaming. Awareness was definitely there. Next, say I'm sitting, listening, and suddenly it seems to me that Yulia had imagined it all. That may very well be. She imagined it, made it up now, or maybe read too much into it. What else should be in the phase? Seems to me she should feel everything. It's one thing to imagine something, and another to feel with your body that something is happening. Okay, let me rephrase that. What shouldn't be in the phase? When you're in the phase, what shouldn't be there? Perhaps Yulia will take a guess herself. Using these questions, you can figure out whether it's the phase or not. What shouldn't be in the phase? The sensation of lying in bed. Yes, absolutely correct. Igor noted that in order to realize whether or not you're imagining, you need to take that primary indication into account. For example, I have a very powerful imagination. I can imagine or picture anything. Say I'm flying somewhere or walking somewhere. But that's in the imagination, because I still feel I'm sitting on my chair. Why does the phase scare people? One reason is that a person is walking somewhere and realizes they don't control their real body. They remember their body is lying somewhere, but can't feel it in any way. They get scared. What if something suddenly happens? That is, they don't have to have that fear, but the point is they don't feel their body. That is, what question should we ask Yulia? Didn't she feel her body? Right, that is, was Yulia walking around in terms of sensation when she looked at that table, or was she lying down and imagining that table? Where was Yulia in terms of sensation? In terms of sensation, in the same place where I saw it all. So, you were there in terms of sensation. That is, you didn't feel yourself sleeping in your bed. Right. Okay, that's one of the main signs that you're in the phase. Having awareness, we checked it off with the plan of action. The next question is whether or not she felt her body. Yulia says she didn't. In terms of sensation, she was there. And there's also a third hint. You can imagine whatever you want, but it's impossible to imagine the phase. That is, say I have a very active imagination. I can imagine I'm walking, flying, and so on. It would be quite vivid and realistic, but it's not the phase. It's impossible to imagine the phase. That is, the experiences are too realistic and too engrossing. You can't imagine them. That's my personal advice to you from the start. I also made some other attempts in the morning. With the indirect method, it didn't really work for me. That is, towards the end, I managed to achieve some changed sensations in my body. That is, I stopped feeling the body lying in bed. It was as if it rose a bit. But no matter how hard I tried to stand up there, sit down, and... Okay, Andre, what's to be done in that situation? Say Yulia did some technique and suddenly felt that she was levitating just a bit, as it were. But flying anywhere further doesn't work. What is it worth doing in such a situation? I'd try changing direction. That is, you can spin or twist. That is, try to spin or levitate. Why not? But it's better to levitate? Well, yes, that is, once you've already moved, you've levitated to the max, and you turn somehow in that position. As a rule, the tie will immediately be cut. Okay, now Yulia, interview him. So tell me about it. I set the alarm for 7. I woke up and stood up. I deliberately went to eat a bit, drank, and went back to sleep. I had the feeling that I nevertheless wasn't sleeping, though I would periodically fall asleep, as it were. Do I have it right that there were no attempts? Not really, though the desire to do them was there. Yulia, Any advice for Andre for tomorrow? The first piece of advice I'd give is, maybe it's worth shortening how long you're awake after the alarm. If you've set it for 7 a.m., maybe it's worth shortening how long you walk around, so it's still possible to fall asleep. Aha! Your first piece of advice is absolutely right. If you don't fall asleep after the alarm, then shorten how long you're awake for. That is, make it shorter. If it was about 10 minutes, then make it 5. I was awake for about 4 minutes, actually. But I woke myself up to the point I couldn't fall asleep. What other advice do we have, Yulia? We need to achieve full-fledged falling asleep and awakening. If they're full-fledged, then so are the results. Perhaps we have some more advice? I'd propose setting the alarm for earlier. Since it was 7 a.m., maybe you had gotten enough sleep and didn't want to sleep more. That's one of the tips for when you don't fall asleep. To continue Yulia's piece of advice, shorten how long you're awake for. You can also shorten your initial sleep a bit. What else? Relax a bit and reduce the importance of your goal. That seems right to me. There was also a lot of motivation, and he couldn't sleep because of that. Andre, tomorrow there might be problems with falling back asleep. Because of that, so we can do the maximum number of attempts during the seminar, it makes sense to focus on nighttime attempts. That is, before the alarm, think, if I wake up before the alarm, I need to try. Try anyways too, right? Generally, it's best to simply get enough sleep, but if we see a situation like that, we need to make an exception. In principle, we could have tried, but without focusing attention on it. Next question then. If I wake up before 6 a.m., say at 3 a.m., do I need to get up or simply start techniques right away? No, go right into action. That is, an alarm is necessary in case we want to use the deferred method. If you wake up and open your eyes, does it make sense to try or is it better to fall asleep? Of course, close them and try right then. It's the same if you wake up and make a movement by accident. No big deal, not the end of the world. Stop and make attempts. Next we have Ravilia and Andre. Andre will be the teacher first and help Ravilia. I walked around about 5 minutes. I took a look at my work inbox. That is, I completely stopped sleeping. I was up, as it were. That is, I didn't want to sleep at all. Then I lay down, and at that moment I started doing techniques. Without falling asleep? Yes, without falling asleep. And I immediately felt I was going to the mirror. And what did you do? What did you start to do? I left. You started imagining you were going to the mirror? Yes, I was walking. I left right away, as it were. Were you imagining it right then or moving? No, I can't say, I don't know. There was this gluiness in my body. That is, you felt your body. I felt my body. But it wasn't the body that was lying down that was gluey, but the one at the mirror. Why don't I see it? That is, I see it, but not that solidly. But I felt this strong gluiness. I don't know what to call it. That is, something powerful happened to my body. But what did you do in the meantime? I then touched the mirror and looked in it. But I still couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't my imagination because it wasn't airy. It wasn't just an image that I simply watched. I felt it with all my body, but I couldn't see my body. That was the main issue for me. Why don't I see my body, but feel everything with the body that's already there? And how did it end? Apparently I fell asleep. I fell asleep where I went back to doing the next technique again. Because I wanted to feel my body the whole time. It was quite a strong sensation. I was under the ceiling, but couldn't see my body again. That is, I looked for my body the whole time. You fell asleep afterwards and then tried again? Yes, I woke up, and then apparently I fell back asleep. I woke back up, and I realized I had woken up. I started techniques again. But for some reason, I was able to immediately leave the whole time. I just got up. It wasn't so much the techniques as me immediately feeling I needed to go to the mirror. I didn't even make it to the food because I didn't see my body the whole time. Andre, naturally that brings up a question for us. Let's go through whether this falls under the phase or not. It seems to me it doesn't because the body was felt, that is, you hadn't fully separated. But Ravilia says she didn't feel the body in her bed. I didn't feel the body in my bed, right, she didn't feel her body. I didn't feel the body at the mirror. That is, I felt it, but I didn't see it. That's what it was. She simply didn't see it. She felt it, but didn't see it. I felt it was gluey. The body could touch everything, but meanwhile there was some gluiness to it. It was like sticky chewing gum. Was there gluiness every time? It was like that every time. There was no time without gluiness. What did you touch with your hands? Did you scrutinize your hands? I swam so hard that the water was gluey too, and all of me turned up there. But I wanted to see my body the whole time. Good, but did you leave the water? No, I looked for my body in the water. So in that case, I understand it was the phase. But there were no deepening techniques for you to feel. But what question should be asked regarding realism? What was the degree of realism? Very high. Right now, we have 100% vividness. What was it like there? How much? It was probably 60% there, or about that. But you said it was very vivid. As it turns out, it wasn't very vivid. But it was enough for me for my first time. I clearly saw the metal. I touched the mirror. It was all there. But you said you couldn't see yourself. Well, I couldn't see my body. Did you recall your plan of action? Yes, I kept it in mind the whole time. But since I didn't see my body that was supposed to go, I couldn't go further. We'll go over that in a bit. Okay, a question for Andre. Ravilia keeps talking about the issue of gluiness in the body. First, let's do a small survey. Raise your hand if today or any time before you ever experienced that gluiness or heaviness in your body. Did it ever happen to you? Okay, thanks. It's a pretty normal phenomenon. Andre, what is that usually a sign of? That you're in the phase? Yes, it's the phase. But what happened? Why was there gluiness? Why is there that gluiness? Maybe you didn't separate completely, or maybe you needed some deepening techniques. Damir, why does gluiness happen? It's not a fully realistic phase. Right, a non-deepened phase. As a rule, it's simply a sign of an unstable phase. The feeling something is not right. It's simply not carried through to the end. And there's no deepening, which we'll talk about today. That happens quite often on separation. Today, we've already spoken about that heaviness, that gluiness. You start to separate and you're pulled back. It's all along the same lines. That is, in this case, you were able to go, but movements weren't unrestricted. That is, there's the sensation your body weighs a ton. You get the sensation of being pulled back by rubber bands. That all means you're in the phase, but it's not deepened. You didn't switch over completely and your body is dragged back. That is, all things considered, it's the phase. Look, if there was consciousness and you didn't feel your body in the bed, it was the phase, but in this case was not completely deepened. Now here's the main question for Andre. What was the main issue? I think you simply need to imagine your body or forget about it and simply carry on, and it will appear. Yes, look, it turns out Ravilia was hung up on the fact that she should see her body. She decided she should see it and feel it no matter what. With complete deepening, what do you think would the presence or absence of the body be an issue? Would there be such a problem? If there were 100% realism, would there be a problem with the body? I think there wouldn't be a problem with the body. It would appear on its own. Now I remember I walked around the room, touched it, and then I didn't have that gluey body. So apparently there were periods without gluiness. Realize entering the phase is not like going out a door and closing it behind you. It's this free-floating state of mind, and a free-floating state of sensations too. Now there are vivid sensations, now there aren't. It's the same with consciousness. Now you're fully aware, now you're half awake. We'll be discussing that later. As regards the very first case that Ravilia described for us, you didn't notice anything? Was there a departure from the procedure? She didn't fall asleep, she immediately took action. But everything still worked out. In fact, that's the direct method. Right, we'll be talking about it tomorrow. There are several ways to approach the direct method. In fact, you inadvertently used one of them. That is, wake up, but instead of falling asleep in order to wake up again, go and lie down to start doing techniques. And you inadvertently did that. It worked. Well, we'll talk about that tomorrow. In fact, Andre was right to say, you just need to get up, walk around, and fall asleep so you can wake up and try techniques. In fact, when I watched your video lessons, I did exactly the same thing. That is, I woke up, did some activity, then I lay down and immediately went into action. And after a few days, everything worked for me, namely with the direct method. On the third lesson after the second night, people sometimes tell interesting stories about how it worked for them. Until then, a person has heard how it's working for others, but nothing has been working for him the whole time. And now he wakes up for his last attempt. He already knows it's time for lunch, that he won't fall asleep anymore, and that he's woken up for good. It doesn't work for him again, and he thinks, what's going on? Everyone can do it, but I can't? I'm going to up and do it for real now. I'm going to just up and do it right now. And he up and does it. And as a rule, he separates immediately without any techniques. So that desire to up and do it now, I also spoke about it yesterday, it's indeed decisive. What's needed is confidence that I'm going to up and do it right now. Not, I'll try, or I should up and do it now. When you wake up in the phase, and you practically always wake up in it, your emotional state is the decisive factor. Andre, tell us how it started for you. I went to sleep around 1:30 a.m. with the intention of waking up. Meanwhile, I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I fell asleep and slept well, but woke up at 5 a.m. And I immediately thought, okay, I woke up before the alarm, I need to try. I start to try. I imagine myself at the mirror. I start to look in the mirror, I try to feel the mirror, and I see some skeleton in the reflection of the mirror. And some mummified hands. I got scared and woke up. I thought, okay, that was interesting, but something wasn't right. Were you aware that you were asleep, that you were looking in the mirror? I was fully aware that I should have a plan of action, and didn't feel my body, and then I simply got scared. But did you know you were dreaming? Yes. You knew it was you and saw that in the mirror. No, I didn't know. That is, I got scared that maybe that was me in the mirror. I woke up, I looked at the clock, it was 5 a.m. I turned off the alarm for 6. I drank water, I walked around for literally 5 minutes, and I lay back down with the intention of waking up again and entering the phase. In all, I did about 6 or 7 more attempts. Of them, 2 or 3 were attempts that started right, but ended suddenly. And one attempt was completely successful. I went up to the mirror, started to palpate it, I tried to see myself in the reflection. This was the very beginning of the attempt? Yes, and I'm already standing at the mirror right then. But the image in the mirror is blurry. It looked like me, but it wasn't clear exactly who it was. And that's when my girlfriend appears and starts talking to me. And I say, listen, dear, you know what? I've just entered the phase. I need to go eat. Listen, we'll talk later. I go to the kitchen and make myself a protein shake. I usually drink a protein shake in the morning. And I start to drink it. All the while, I walk around the kitchen and scrutinize everything. Right then, as I was drinking the shake, everything around quietly started getting more and more realistic. That is, I got to the level of hyper-realism, when I already felt everything absolutely realistically. Even the protein shake tasted much better than usual. Then I drank it down and thought, I need to carry on. On to the next item in the plan. I wanted to influence my physiology, but I got lost on exactly what I should do. And while I was thinking and deciding on what exactly I should do, I woke up. Afterwards, there were another few attempts that were not so successful. But I noticed this time I tried regardless of whether I had woken up with closed eyes or open eyes, or whether or not I had moved. The rain was also bothering me, and it was thundering. And I didn't have earplugs. In the end, I got under my pillow to hear less sound, and everything worked out more or less. Andre, at what moment did the mirror appear? How much time had gone by? Was it a long time or not? Well, I started to imagine the mirror itself. At first I was simply imagining it, and then it started to materialize just when I started palpating it. And that's when the image started to appear. The body in my bed disappeared almost immediately. That is, when I started to imagine the mirror, I still felt I was lying down. And then I zoned out. That is, I switched completely over to the mirror to the sensations that were at it. After the experience, did you get a feeling of satiation from drinking? Satiation? The feeling of your stomach being full. I enjoyed the taste, it was rich and interesting. But no, there was no feeling of being full. Look, we'll be discussing that tomorrow. Unlike real life, where having food, the taste of food, and the effect of food are all tied together, in the phase it's all separate. You may have a feeling of fullness without eating anything. You might enjoy a taste without food. You might not taste anything as you eat, and so on. And you might have them all at once. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. It's all separate there, and only might be tied together. But it also might not be tied together. That is, you might get a feeling of being full without having eaten anything. But that's another topic for another day. Igor and Irina. Igor will be the teacher first and help Irina go through her attempts. Irina, tell us how you did it, according to the procedure. From the very beginning, from the moment you set your alarm and woke up, what did you do? I lay down and set the alarm for 6, with the intention that if I woke up earlier, I would go into action right away. And that's exactly what happened. Meanwhile, I woke up wide awake. I looked at my watch, it was 4:30 a.m. I immediately closed my eyes and went into action. Well, I went to look for the mirror. And what exactly did you start to do? How did you go look for the mirror? Well, I didn't even imagine where it was. I don't even know how to say it. Somehow it all just worked out for me on its own. That is, you imagined yourself at the mirror, or you imagined where the mirror was and imagined how you walked there? Yes, that is, I walked there. You started imagining you were going to the mirror. Yes, I'm walking. And I just start to palpate it there. But for some reason, I didn't see myself there. That is, I'm just standing and feel that I'm standing at the mirror. That is, you felt you were standing at the mirror, but I had thoughts at some point, the feeling that I had done something wrong somehow. Maybe because I didn't see myself there. You didn't see yourself in the reflection. Right, I didn't see myself in the mirror, but you did see something. Did you see the mirror? I saw the mirror, but I didn't see myself in the mirror. Okay, and in terms of sensation, were you in the bed or were you completely in front of the mirror? Did you feel your body lying in bed? Yes. Did you feel your body in bed? It did bother me that I felt myself in bed, but you also partially felt yourself standing at the mirror. Yes. But at the same time, it seemed to me that I had thought it all up. Now Igor will tell us all about it. Please continue. Next, I thought it wasn't working, and I started separating. And how did you start separating? What do you mean? I tried to levitate. That is, you felt you were fully in your body again, lost the sensation of yourself at the mirror, and started levitating? Yes, I started levitating. It seems levitating worked out for me, because it was easy. Then, I went back to the mirror. But again, I didn't see myself there, and at some point, apparently, I fell asleep. Because then I woke up and tried to do it again. For some reason, I'd always fall asleep. I didn't make it to eating, let's say. But it seemed to me I walked around and tried something there. That is, it seemed to you, or were you really walking around? Did you feel the body on your bed? Half and half, I think. What do you think? Why did I bring a glass of water right now? Could you explain to Irina what happened to her? So, I wouldn't say that what happened to Irina was incomplete separation. However, you didn't put your all into the technique you were doing. Like Michael said yesterday, using water as an example. You should put your all into the technique so your sensations pour over. What you were able to do was pour yourself 50% into it. That is, it's as if you're both standing, feeling something, and lying down. What Igor said was absolutely right. What needed to have been done, Igor? It was necessary to stop the excessive analysis of the situation, continue to palpate the mirror more intensely, and put your all into the techniques with the goal, I'll do it right now. That is, carry on with your actions. Yes, carry on with your actions no matter what and pour yourself over. That is, you're standing at the mirror and continue to touch it even more intensely, and the fact that you don't see yourself doesn't matter. After all, I didn't say you should see yourself. I said, come and tell me what you saw there. You didn't have the task of seeing yourself. That is, that's one of the problems. That is, there was an expectation, and you thought, why aren't I here? That means something's not right. And now, Igor, show us what Irina did using the glass as an example. That is, at the beginning, she did pour herself over. That is, she poured herself in halfway and then went back. That was due to too much analysis of the situation. Irina said to herself, something's not right. She returned back and started all over again. She started all over. And so Irina poured herself over the whole time without fully pouring herself all the way. How long did you walk around after the alarm? 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, then you lay down. Did you try to fall asleep or start doing it right away? Yes, I tried to fall asleep and relax. And you weren't able to. I wasn't able to, but I decided to do something anyway. That is, I went up to the mirror, but in the bathroom and not the hallway. Please explain to us how you went. How? That is, did you stand up and go? First, I wiggled my body in order to just get out of it. That is, you started doing rotations, turning around your head-to-toe axis? Yes. And at some point you rolled out. And what happened? And it seemed to me that I had stood up somehow. Yes, you stood up. And when you stood up, how was it in terms of sensation? Were you in bed or fully on your feet? Or were your sensations that of standing up? I saw that I had stood up. You saw from the outside that you had stood up. I don't remember whether I felt myself in my body. Look, when I stand, now I've stood up and am standing. My sensations are that of standing. Did you have the same sensations that you were indeed standing? No, I had something else. I simply saw myself from the outside. That is, you saw yourself from the outside? Yes. It seemed to me that I had thought it all up again. That was every time. And your body? Meanwhile, did you feel your body in bed? The body in the bed, did you feel it? You're lying in bed and see that you've also gotten up? Well, yes, but afterwards it seemed to me that I had eaten something after all. But how did it seem to you? You went to the kitchen, or was there something nearby? I then felt myself in the kitchen. I was sleeping there, actually. Okay. Excuse me, I have this recurring question. Irina, why do you keep saying seemed? What makes you use that word? That is, what's the catch? What's missing? Yes, I simply don't know what it is anyway. For me, this is some mysterious stuff, as it were. That is, you can't sort through it, and so you're experiencing doubt. Now Igor should tell us what it was. Seems to me it was not a completely realized phase. During the first attempt, first of all, then there was a visualization, during which there again occurred a not completely realized phase. Okay, Igor, in the situation when Irina saw herself from the outside and stood up, as it were, what was that? That was visualization. But what does that mean? It appears to me that Irina saw herself and didn't imagine it. Yes, this feeling I was standing nearby, that is, what does that mean? It's clear she did not stand up herself, but what does that indicate? It indicates she was in the phase. Yes, she was already in the phase, and that's why her actions afterwards worked. Yes, you need to put your all into the technique more. No need to concentrate on what it seemed. Rather, you need to concentrate on your plan of action. Pour yourself into it. Yes, pour yourself into those sensations. That is, concentrate on those sensations that you have in the body standing at the mirror, the one that feels and touches. Now, Irina, help Igor sort through things. So I went to bed at 2 a.m., but woke up at 7:45 a.m. with my alarm clock. I stayed awake until 8:10, then went to sleep. I wasn't preoccupied with whether or not it would work. I fell asleep, I slept until 10:30. I woke up 3 times in the meantime. Each time I woke up, I immediately tried to imagine myself at the mirror. I imagined myself at the mirror. Afterwards, I was able to fall safely back asleep. That's all your attempts? All my attempts. Irina, what do you think that might be due to? He didn't get enough sleep? Feeling sleepy, not getting enough sleep, happens, right? Of course. If you hadn't gotten enough sleep, it'll be really hard for you. Naturally, you can enter the phase without having gotten enough sleep, but that's much harder. Here's a question. Maybe there simply wasn't that aggression we talked about here. Well, it's hard for it to appear when you want to sleep, but you're right. Let's look at it another way. Say Igor has gotten enough sleep but still falls asleep during attempts. In that case, the main factor would be a lack of aggression. That is, it should have been done intensely, and there's another reason why falling asleep might happen. Imagine not even Igor's situation if he had gotten enough sleep, but some person who is woken up and is starting to try to appear at the mirror. He tries, and falls asleep. Why might something like that still happen? One reason why you might fall asleep is if you drag out one of the steps of the actions. Say you try to appear at the mirror for 15 to 20 seconds instead of 3 to 5. Of course you'll fall asleep doing it, all the more so if you haven't slept enough, because you want to sleep. That is, dragging out techniques is a factor in falling asleep. And so, Irina, what should we advise Igor to do tomorrow, taking today's situation into account, for him not to drag out the mirror technique? And what else? To get enough sleep. You know, like on a day off, when you don't have to get up for anything, you sleep, wake up, and fall back asleep until it's almost lunchtime. At those moments, you're waking up in the phase the whole time. At any moment upon awakening, you can simply get up and go. It's the phase the whole time. You don't even need to think about it. The more you sleep, the more you get enough sleep, the more it works. Now raise your hands if today, or last night after the lesson, you slept, had some dream, and suddenly during the dream you realized it was a dream. Raise your hand if that happened to you today. Raise them and keep them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is outside the program, and I've given you a heads up about it. It might happen on its own, but it's also considered the phase, and we should carry out the same plan of action if we've become conscious while dreaming. What should be our first action upon awakening? The mirror. Our first task was to wake up and immediately appear at the mirror. Again, you don't need to immediately appear at the mirror your whole life during your practice of the phase. That's just our plan. Later, you'll change it, and will have any personal goal you want instead of the mirror. Raise your hand if you've woken up and immediately been able to appear at the mirror. Raise your hand if you've been able to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Raise your hand if you've been able to immediately separate. That is, immediately stand up, immediately levitate, and so on. During a secondary exit doesn't count, we don't count it. What's to be done if you've turned up in paralysis? That's the phase 2. And how to separate in that situation? Well, if you're not scared, of course, because many are scared by paralysis, and there won't be any phase at that point. In fact, one may separate. Either gradually start moving or imagine yourself already standing somewhere, say next to your bed or at that goal of yours. That is, you avoid that movement and you're immediately standing somewhere. Or try to fly, for example. There are many options like that. This won't be in the statistics either, I'm counting just for me. Raise your hand if, in one situation or another during attempts, after techniques, you tried to separate, but it didn't completely work out as it were. Who had halfway separations today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This won't be in the statistics, it's just for me. For the teachers, I would like to say that halfway separations, when you ask how many there were, are usually an extremely good indicator of the lesson's effectiveness. That is, the more halfway separations, the better the results in other areas, as a rule. If you had halfway separations, that is, you started movements and it didn't completely work out, you were already in the phase. The problem is that you were unable to separate in the phase for one reason or another. Stick to it, change the direction you're moving in or return to a technique that was working, and then try to separate again. Raise your hand if you tried rotation, the rotation technique. It doesn't matter whether or not it worked, but that you tried to spin. If you tried, that's one of the basic techniques. Try it. Raise your hand if you've been able to twist, that is, rotation started. Despite the fact that it's the phase, we won't be counting it. That is, we'll only be counting those cases where you at least stood up. It really improves your success rate if, before waking up, before trying anything at all, you imagine you've turned over 180 degrees. Say you've woken up on your back. Imagine you're lying on your stomach and start doing techniques in that position. Your success rate will immediately go up. Raise your hand if you tried the swimming technique. Who suddenly swam somewhere? Visualization of the hands. Who tried to see their hands? Who had their hands appear or felt them? Now I'm imagining that I'm rubbing my hands. I imagine it quite vividly and even see them and so on, but now I'm rubbing them. And that's the difference in any case, no matter how vivid your imagination. And when I say that you should have felt them and seen them, you should have done just that. Did you feel them for real? That's what I'm asking about. But I didn't see those movements. You may or may not see them. You might just feel them. You might even hear them but not see or feel them. Doesn't matter. Any of those manifestations speak to the fact that you're in the phase. And the next time you simply get up, no need to do techniques. If your hands are there, get up and go. That's it. You're already in the phase. You can only make the whole process harder, and that's just what all of you are doing. Do I have to constantly explain to you all that you yourselves make everything harder? Why? Remember, I told you yesterday from the beginning that you have this stereotype that the phase is difficult, and you often simply aren't ready for it being so easy to do. It's working for you on its own, and you tell yourself, no, something isn't right, this can't be, it should be another way, it should be more difficult, and so on. And you yourself ruin everything. I'm often accused of exaggerating the easiness of the phenomenon, but it actually is easy. It's only difficult because you make a ton of mistakes. People often simply don't pay any attention to that. A few months ago, I went on the forum, and there's a thread where people describe their first experiences. I read one interesting post by a person. He wrote, "I tried too, but nothing was working for me, and then I found the best way to do it." That is, do everything like I did, and it will work for you too. I simply opened the textbook and found the place where all the mistakes are listed. I looked, and out of 16 mistakes, I made 10. I just fixed them, and everything worked for me right away. That is, people often say, I tried everything, it's not working for me. As a rule, they're making the full range of possible mistakes. You just need to fix them, and everything will become really easy. Deepening. Raise your hand if you've tried to imagine yourself walking around the room, touching everything, and so on. Raise your hand. Who was able to feel themselves walking around the room? Who did it work out for? Look, if you had slept before the phase and fell asleep after the phase, you might forget that experience. The phase has nothing to do with it. It has to do with human memory. You might wake up and do something, but it might disappear from your memory if you fall asleep right away. It's the same with the phase. If you fall asleep after it, your memories may disappear. Very often, people say, I remember that I was in the phase and it was realistic. And they come here and say, was I really in the phase after all? What actually went on with me? Because you fell asleep afterwards. Why are experiences during a daytime nap often the most vivid? Because the nap is short, and after the phase you usually don't sleep and remain conscious. And now, the key question for me, before the break. according to which I personally rate the effectiveness of the lessons. Raise your hand if one way or another, at least one task was completed, seeing the mirror or eating. So, for the lesson on theory, we have three main topics. First, a discussion of deepening. Deepening as stabilization of the state. Then comes maintaining. Then, we'll spend the most time on obtaining information: how, why, from where, what it is, and so on. Then we'll have a break. After the break, we'll reinforce another very important part of the indirect method, which will increase your future success rate many times. And so, our first task is deepening the phase. In this case, it's not about entering the phase, but stabilizing. Meanwhile, while we discuss deepening as a technique for stabilizing the state, you will better appreciate deepening as a technique for entering the phase. In fact, they're one and the same. Now I'll explain where the difference lies. Many misunderstand everything at first. Many think there's wakefulness. There's the phase, and what else? Sleep. Yes, sleep. And many take the view that there are three different states you can enter. Either you're awake, or you're in the phase, or you're asleep. That's quite a wrong view that makes it difficult to approach the phenomenon and what is actually happening to you. In fact, there's a spectrum of states, and it's a single one. These are all the various states of our consciousness, of our physiology, and not fixed states of some kind. For example, wakefulness is the entire spectrum of states that we call wakefulness. Say you've woken up and are lying down. You've awoken, as it were. You're lying half asleep. That's also considered wakefulness. You're at a training session somewhere, at some lessons. You're also in wakefulness, and in a very active state. When you're sleepy and tired, that's also wakefulness. If you're relaxing somewhere, drinking champagne with friends, that's also wakefulness. Though your brain is working differently there. That is, this is the spectrum of states that we call wakefulness. Sleep is the same. In non-REM sleep, either nothing occurs or there's some pointless monologue with oneself. Or some images and pictures appear. In REM sleep, entire episodes take place, including very realistic and nearly lucid ones, and we call it all sleep. That is, there's no fixed state of sleep, that's all untrue. And the point is that the phase also fits right in this picture. It's not just one state that you either are in or not in. It's an entire spectrum of states. Say you've woken up and it seems to you you've woken up and there's no phase at all. But in fact, you're lying in the phase. Or you've deliberately left a dream. Or you've separated, but your sensations are so vague that you can't even figure out if you're imagining them or they're real. That is, it's a very weak phase. Experiences can be realistic, 80 to 90% realism. The phase can be hyper-realistic, fully lucid and realistic. Sometimes you return back and you realize that some of your actions were the wrong ones. That is, there was something with your consciousness and you didn't fully wake up. Sometimes you have difficulty distinguishing where there was consciousness and where there wasn't, and you can't figure out what happened to you. What am I saying that for? We are striving for an ideal phase experience, one that's fully aware and realistic. But initially, it might start from wherever. And we've already encountered this many times today. People encounter a non-deepened phase, and it seems to them that nothing will work for them because of a lack of realism, of certain sensations. But in fact, you simply need deepening techniques. Look, there are an enormous number of techniques. You can read about them on our website, on the forum, and in our textbook. There's no point in listing them all. We'll talk about several mandatory ones tomorrow. That is, tomorrow you should come and tell me how you tried to deepen, and I'll give you some general information. All the rest is on the site, in the textbook, and so on. Kinds of techniques under sensory amplification. I've already told you that for us, sensations in the phase are like air here in reality. That is, you should feel sensations the whole time. You should feed on them. Why? Because first of all, if we speak of who I am now, you can say a lot about consciousness and where I came from, about destiny. But above all, I am my sensations, and I now feel that I'm standing here and I see you. Analysis of what is actually going on here occurs only against that backdrop, but above all, I am my sensations. If I want to appear in another place, so my own self appears there, I should move my sensations there. Before we talk about that, I would like to ask you all a question. Please tell me, what kind of freak we have here in the book? He's Penfield's homunculus. This freak here. You can pass it down your rows. If you're interested, have a look. It's this freak with enormous hands and a tiny little body. Who knows what this freak is? What is it? In fact, this freak is us. It's us from the point of view of our movements and sensations. They're both sensory and motor homunculi. That is, this freak with enormous hands is us from the point of view of our sensations. We see one another in the same proportions we do now, but from the point of view of our sensations, we have much greater perception in the hands. That's why the first thing we'll be talking about in sensory amplification is what? Yes, the hands. But why? Vision is even more important to us, so why aren't we discussing it right away? Because sometimes vision isn't there. Yes, because vision might not immediately be there. That's why palpation comes first, or recently I've been using the term feeling in to make it more distinctive. The main thing is not to make the typical mistake of thinking it's all done just for appearances, to wake up and just touch. You need to attentively, literally feel in all nearby objects, trying to palpate their texture and fine details. That is, you can touch your hands, you can touch your legs, and touch fine details. Meanwhile, deepening is carried out alongside the plan of action. Say I'm going to the mirror, and while I'm going to the mirror, I touch the walls, I rub my hands, grab some objects, scrutinize them, and at the mirror itself, I scrutinize the frame and its fine details. Then, if realism is still weak, while I'm going to the kitchen to eat something, I also scrutinize the wallpaper and small objects. You feel in everything nearby. You try to feel everything around. You feed on those feelings. You charge yourself with them. You pour yourself from one cup to another with that very feeling in. As a rule, several seconds are enough for vision to appear if it wasn't there initially. If vision is there, then we move on at once. But how to create vision if it isn't there? Who knows? Say I'm in the phase and I feel I'm standing and can palpate all nearby objects. We raise our hands or any other object to our eyes and then try to scrutinize them without opening our eyes. As a rule, your hands start to appear after several seconds and you see everything around you. The main thing is not to open your eyes because in a shallow phase, opening your eyes leads to the possibility of you opening them in real life. So be careful with opening your eyes. That's why you can close them 100 times without having opened them a single time. Peering and peering in. Looking at your hand is like this. That's not deepening. Most likely if you look at it like this, in just a few seconds you'll be lying in bed. And if we scrutinize the fine details of the palm from a close distance by focusing our eyes, even if it had all been dim, it will become more realistic right then as soon as you start to scrutinize. As a rule, several seconds are enough to scrutinize everything around. Again, while carrying out the plan of action, we touch and scrutinize everything, and realism increases. The main thing is the fine details of objects and to never ever stay too long. Palpation is the same. If you've gotten up and stood still, touching one place for a long time, that's the same as relaxation and you'll be thrown out. You constantly change it up. That is, you touch one thing, a second, and a third. It's the same with peering. Saw one object clearly? See the next object clearly. No need to look at one place for a long time. Look, so as not to be returned during deepening, do it only while carrying out your plan of action. Earlier I made a mistake. I wrote in the textbook and said at seminars, separate, deepen, and only then do your plan of action. That was a mistake. You need to deepen during the plan of action because people often have their phase end while they're deepening. That is, tomorrow, I won't be satisfied with stories about whether you were able to enter the phase. If it works for you, I'll need to hear how you were able to achieve a high level of realism. You enter the phase, but some sensations are lacking. Say vision is dim. What needs to be done in that case? Yes, focus your eyes, start scrutinizing. If bodily sensations are lacking, start to touch everything with your hands and it will come. Everything is quite simple. Are some sensations lacking? Sharpen them. Focus your attention on them, and they will start to improve right then. That is, it's all very simple. Now, for general information, I'll list some other techniques for you, but this is mandatory on tomorrow's plan of action. Everyone should not only enter the phase, but also deepen it and tell how you did it. For general information, I'll list other techniques for you that can also be used. Remember how we said the phase may simulate expectations if control is not there? In deepening, this can be used without a hitch. After separating, focus your attention on being not somewhere out in the phase, but in being your physical body in physical reality. Well, of course, don't just stand there. You should go somewhere right then. Focus your attention on you walking in the physical world, in your physical body. That is, this self-deception occurs. You focus your attention on your being in reality with your real physical body. The phase becomes realistic right then. It plays along. That is, so we're in reality, okay, and you get reality. I found yet another technique on the forum. I simply went on the forum and deepening was being described in some thread. Say you enter the phase, you find a deepener device, and you press a button on it. I think some hold it in their hands, some like this, and the phase deepens. Did you test it on yourself? That's a separate issue, but naturally it might work. That is, you find a deepener that you press a button on and it works. There's the deepening technique of Stephen LaBerge, who popularized lucid dreaming. He simply used rotation when you start turning in place. Intensification of vibrations in the phase also leads to its deepening. In fact, there are an enormous number of techniques. But as a matter of principle, the most important one is your sensations. If your sensations are lacking, intensify them. That is, make them realistic. Try for the phase to always be as deep as possible. The point is that the deeper it is, the longer it will last. Does straining the brain also belong here? Straining the brain too. In the phase, it's creating vibrations. When I said intensifying and maintaining vibrations, straining the brain is a technique for their creation and intensification. Or straining the body without using muscles and chewing gum? Yes, but that's already maintaining. That's maintaining? Well, it can be deepening too, maintaining the phase. Prolonging the phase, you might call it. First, let's talk about how long you can be in the phase. That's a wider topic than deepening, and it's quite difficult to approach. I'd like to tell you right away that evaluating the duration of a phase, in time that is, in minutes and seconds, is one of the biggest mistakes you can make in your practice. Don't focus on how long you're in the phase in terms of minutes, seconds, and so on. That's a pointless, meaningless goal. Success at being in the phase should be evaluated only by completion of the plan of action, and how many necessary, predetermined tasks you did. How much time it takes doesn't matter. What's important is that you have goals and accomplish them. A pointless, abstract goal like how many seconds or minutes you're there has no real justification. A goal in maintaining is necessary so that you can carry out your predetermined tasks. As regards how long you're in the phase, it's very individual. There are people who struggle with maintaining and are always quickly returned from the phase. We had a case at a seminar when one lady, her story was interesting. She had thought everyone who did the phase was crazy, or some kind of psycho. She had friends who did it, and her friends somehow persuaded her to try. She tried, and it turned out that she had a predisposition for it, and it worked for her quite easily. And they were at the seminar as a group. And once I talked about maintaining at the second lesson, she discussed at the third lesson how that really got to her because she didn't realize what it was about or what it was for. And out of spite, after entering the phase the first time, she simply started counting seconds. She counted to 300 the first time, and then to 600. The third time, she counted to 1,000. That's 15 minutes at least. Then she stopped counting and did something else there. Of course, while counting itself serves as a technique for maintaining, that's still quite a long time. So she came and said, I was there for 15 minutes. In fact, that's quite a lot. That's a clear predisposition in a person. It's pretty normal to be in the phase starting from 1 minute. A minute in the phase. That's already good. Now you're thinking, 1 minute, but that's so little. What to do with it? And indeed it is. What's a minute in physical reality? In 1 minute, I am hardly able to go through the hallway and down the steps to get outside. That takes about a minute. I just went outside and that's it. I didn't manage to do anything else. In the phase, space is completely different. Fast translocation, fast finding of objects. And what happens to our psychology, to our consciousness? Remember, our consciousness, doesn't work with time, but with events. That's why when you don't do anything, time drags on slowly because the mind is not focusing on events. And vice versa. When there are lots of events, time flies, as they say. In the phase, you can quickly translocate. You appear somewhere quickly and you carry out goal number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And as a rule, somebody comes and says he wrote half a notebook about one experience. His hands shake as he talks about what happened to him there. Everything was so bright. Everything was so clear. At first he says, "Look, I was there half an hour." And then he goes into great detail about what happened to him and where he was. You listen, but based on experience, you realize that if it was a minute there, or possibly just half a minute, that's still something. That is, because of the many events, subjectively, it seems to you that you were there for much longer. So, when I speak of 1 minute, I'm speaking of 1 minute in the phase, which in effect is perceived by you as perhaps 5 or 10 minutes. If you would be in the phase for 10 real-life minutes, believe me, after a minute or two, you wouldn't know what to do next. It will seem to you like a whole day spent in the phase, or an entire eternity. It'll seem to you that you won't return to reality anymore because you've already been there too long, and so on. It's really like that. Several minutes in the phase are perceived as an entire day, an hour, and so on. So when I say 1 minute, don't get upset that that's really short. Believe me, in 1 minute you can repeatedly complete a several-item plan of action. And that's why I'm telling you not to get obsessed over time. You should obsess over performing tasks. That's why what's most important to me is a completed plan of action. That's what I'm emphasizing. How long you stay in the phase is of purely secondary importance. But regardless of your predisposition for how long you can naturally stay in the phase, the techniques we will now be discussing will multiply that length of time. That is, if you naturally can stay there for 5 minutes, you'll be able to for 10 to 15 minutes using these techniques. If you can naturally be there for 10 seconds, then we can simply extend the time you're in the phase for up to a minute. And so, there will be several things here. It's all much more difficult than deepening. First, we'll discuss the following. Raise your hand if today you had been in the phase, been returned to your body, and woke up afterwards. Raise your hand if that happened to you today. Thank you. Those are Group A techniques, that is, resisting ejection to wakefulness. Raise your hand if you fell asleep in the phase today in the middle of the process. Thank you. These are Group B techniques, resisting falling asleep. And there will also be Group C techniques. We'll speak about them separately. And so, our first task will be to go through all of the ways to resist being ejected to reality. First, I'll just say, but not write, that the deeper you're in the phase, the longer you'll be in it. So try for max deepening each time. That is, to get at least 80%, 90%, 100%. That is, the deeper the phase, the more stable it will be and the longer it will last. Is it possible for deepening not to work, despite all of the techniques you've done? There are cases where people are unable to deepen. For some people, there's a chronic problem with deepening. There are such cases, and unfortunately, I can't say whether or not the problem even has a solution, because I don't know whether mistakes are being made. Well, I've encountered practitioners who say they are unable to completely deepen. They're either making mistakes or they're naturally like that. It has something to do with psychology, right? It might simply have something to do with psychology. In fact, everything we're discussing yesterday, today, and tomorrow is 90% pure psychology. And so how to resist an ejection into reality? The same sensory amplification, but as needed or constant. What is constant sensory amplification? When you're in the phase, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you feed on sensations the whole time, even in a deep phase. That is a deep, realistic phase, but you still constantly try to touch and scrutinize everything. That is, the whole time you feed on those sensations, you feel them the whole time. It's like air in real life. Or the second option, do it as needed. Say you're in a realistic phase, you feel that it will suddenly start to fade away and distort as if everything would end right now. And at that moment, you start to touch and scrutinize everything again. That is, you essentially employ deepening and return to the phase. It's constant or as-needed sensory amplification. That is, as soon as the need arises, you start to replenish the lost sensations right away. From the same place we got the deepener, we also have the maintainer device. You walk in the phase, and as soon as you're losing it, you press this button, and it deepens you. Hooking on to the phase. Say you're in the phase, and you abruptly start losing it. You don't manage to do anything in time, including scrutinizing and palpation. You can always press your hands together. That is, you always have your hands on hand. And you suddenly feel that everything is fading away, distorting. All is lost, and you'll turn up in your body. And that's when you press your hands together. The idea, the point, is that you suddenly get sensations. You're lying in bed, you feel your body, you feel your room and your bed. But inasmuch as you've pressed your hands together there, you won't feel your physical hands. You feel only the hands that are pressed together. And starting from them, you can wiggle again and enter the phase, that is, hooking onto the sensations. Not necessarily the hands, you can grab onto some object. And your tongue, bite your lip, that is, hook onto something with your sensations. One guy told us one of the funniest things I've heard at a seminar. He walked through the street in the phase, having felt it was all ending. He remembered that technique, but what to grab? He grabs a lamppost, and he said he was already lying at home, still holding the lamppost, embracing it. And starting from that lamppost, he resumed the phase again. That is, hook onto sensations. Forced falling asleep. What is it? Walking in the phase, you feel it's starting to end. Actually, it also works for deepening. You feel the phase is ending, that it will end now. You already start to feel it. You simply lie down directly in the phase as if you wanted to sleep for several seconds. Just lie down anywhere, on the floor, on the ground, and for several seconds, as if you were falling asleep for real. But don't fall asleep, just act like you're falling asleep. In literally 2 to 3 seconds, get up, and the space will be stabilized and clear. Might you fall asleep like that? Of course. That's why I said 2 to 3 seconds, otherwise you'll fall asleep. Be very careful with this. That is, imagine falling asleep. In fact, with training and practice, you won't even have to lie down. False awakening can be reproduced along the way. And indeed, that will immediately return you back to the phase. Again, there are an enormous number of techniques. It's pointless to list them all now here. Now, the next topic is resisting falling asleep. How for us to not fall asleep in the phase? There are a couple of key points here. 1. Constantly realize falling asleep is a possibility. That is, you should constantly realize that you might zone out and fall asleep. It might seem trivial, but constant awareness of the fact that you might zone out really focuses your attention and consciousness. That is, knowing that you might zone out, you proceed much more attentively during certain events, not getting sidetracked. And that maintains your awareness. Meanwhile, the most important factor is probably remain an observer. I'll explain now what remain an observer means. Of course, it's not an exact term, but what's the idea? People make me do something there. That's just what I was getting to. Say you're walking along the street in the phase, and you see how a bunch of people are discussing something there. You become interested in what they're discussing there. You go up, and there's something interesting there. You realize you're in the phase, but you're interested in commenting or saying something. And you join in a side event that was happening on its own, without you initiating it. If you intervene in those events, the probability of you falling asleep while communicating with that group of people is very high. That's why you should try to follow only your predetermined goals. I'm going there, I'm doing this, I'm not getting sidetracked by some small stuff. Since it was stated correctly that if you get sucked into something, you'll probably fall asleep, and the experience will turn into a regular dream. Back when I still lived in Moscow, there was an interesting case I wanted to tell you about. It often happens that you tell people things that you yourself forget about. I talked about food at the seminar then, too, and here I've entered the phase, and I think about how I haven't eaten anything in the phase in a while. I go up to the refrigerator, open it, and it's full of processed cheese. It's overflowing. In real life, I love processed cheese. I really do love it. But in the phase, I thought, there might be something tastier than processed cheese. I think, okay, I'll go carry out my plan of action. I try to close the refrigerator door, but the cheeses fall out. I start to put them back and try to close the door again, but they fall out again. That's when I fell asleep and the phase ended. That is, being in the habit of always having to close the refrigerator door ejected me. I was unable to close the door as the cheeses fell out. I picked them up and tried to close the door again, but they fell out again. We have to beat it into us from childhood to close the refrigerator door. We have that habit all the time. Even in the phase, it knocked me out of the experience immediately in that case. This brings us to some interesting points. Look, we can wake up from the phase and enter wakefulness. We can fall asleep. Tell me, please, what else can happen to us? Here's a shocking fact. In the absolute majority of cases when it seems to you that it's all over and you've returned to reality, you're still in the phase. Those are so-called false awakenings. I'm emphasizing it again that this is especially true for experienced practitioners. The more experience you have, the more often it happens. And that brings us to our next point. How to figure out whether you've returned from the phase or are still in it. That is, we're now approaching a fundamental key point. What's the difference between worlds? What's the difference between when I'm in reality and in the phase? For example, if I was in the phase and was turned back, how to figure out if that was indeed what happened? Test the laws of physics. We'll talk about that right now. A challenge for you. Prove to me now that I'm in reality. Your nose, if you pinch it, if you can breathe, then you're in the phase. Pinch your nose. A well-known technique, especially in the West, is to try to breathe through a pinched nose. We conducted an experiment at our research center with a group of volunteers. We sent them tasks. We asked them to deliberately, they knew they were in the phase, breathe through a pinched nose. It turned out that even if someone knew they were in the phase, their first attempt to breathe through their pinched nose was successful in only 1 person in 3. Half of the rest think, okay, since I'm in the phase, I should breathe. And then they breathe. A third still can't. It turns out that technique can be used for verification, but that the technique might not work anyway. You can also try to do something impossible. Raise your hand if you've had a phase experience where you couldn't fly while knowing you were in the phase. Can you describe it? Yes, I was in the phase. I really wanted to both create fire and levitate, and nothing at all was successful. At first, it might seem that the phase is this world where everything is possible, where you go 1, 2, 3, and everything happens on its own, like magic. The deeper the phase, the more it becomes similar to what? To reality. And our abilities become the same way, practically. That's why levitating in the phase turns out not to be so easy. Sometimes you even need to train for it, too. That is, we can't verify in that way. Sure, it might work, but might not. What other ideas do you have? Try to morph into someone. To morph into someone. Well, if levitating doesn't work, then morphing is also going to be difficult. In the movie Inception, there's this totem. How did the main character check where he was? He had a spinning top and would spin it. How did he figure out whether or not he was in the phase? If it falls, it's real life. Right, if the spinning top fell, it meant the main character was in real life. And now tell me, can you test whether you're in the phase that way? No. Why not? Because it may or may not fall. Yes, the top might fall in the phase. It looks cool in the movies. Practically everything in that movie clearly isn't true. But the fact that there is such a movie about our topic, that's really great. Reading text? Yes, text can often fade away, but then again, not always. But it may change. But if you're reading text and it's normal at first, if you look away for a little while, it will change. Yes, it might change, but then again, the key word is might. And what if you put your hand in fire? Hand in fire. And if you're in real life? In real life, you're burn your fingers. So you're ready to get burned to find out where you are? We had a case where a lady also proposed cutting off her arm. She goes, "Whoa, I cut my arm off. Aha, I'm in reality." Look in the mirror? But what do you see in the mirror? Why do we need to look in the mirror to check where we are? Because in real life, there will always be a reflection, but not in the phase. But in the phase, it's conceivable that there will be a real reflection there too. It's possible, but it's more likely that it won't be quite realistic. One of the best methods, I'd like to emphasize this is not absolute, is hyperconcentration. Peer into the fine details of objects from a close distance. At first, when you look, it will come into sharp focus, but when you continue to focus your attention for a long time on some small object, the space will not hold up against excessive concentration, and it begins to distort, get smoky, dissolve, change color, and so on. But even that method is not absolute. There is no 100% way to determine whether or not you're in the phase. But having conducted several tests, say with a pinched nose and hyperconcentration, the first test tells you you're in reality, while the second test indicates that you're in the phase. There's a psychological aspect. The very fact that you've returned from the phase and have doubts as to where you are means there's a 90% chance that you're still in the phase. The question was, but you need to check? If you don't check, what will happen? You've been returned to the body, let's say, and weren't able to enter the phase again. You've gotten up, walked around, and fallen asleep because you woke up in the phase, or you don't realize that you're still in the phase until something unusual happens. Now, a few rules for maintaining. Some of them will each help to enormously prolong being in the phase. The same goes for maintaining. Number 1, you need intensity the whole time. The whole time you should be doing something, striving for something, carrying something out. From stories of experiences as a rule, I foresee what will happen ahead of time. Say somebody comes and says he separates from his body, goes to the window, and starts scrutinizing. I already know he'll say next that the phase ended. Why? Because he lost his focus. Right, he went up, relaxed, and starts scrutinizing the space from far away. In order to have intensity, what do we need? There should be a plan of action with 2 to 3 items. Moreover, they should be predetermined. I always have a plan of action at every moment. Even right now, I'm recalling my plan of action while I'm talking about it. Because what if I'm in the phase now? That is, I always know my plan of action. I always know what I'll be doing in the phase. You can always tell apart an experienced and advanced practitioner by his or her having a plan of action, and for each phase at that. Clearly, if you have 10 phases a night, maybe you don't always get to your plan, but that's your choice. But a plan should always be there. For that very reason, a plan of action was mandatory for you. Before, when I didn't give a specific plan of action, I told people, you can do this, you can do that, you can do X, you can do Y, the choice is up to you. Everyone would say, yeah, we're making our choice. And as a result, people would enter the phase and stand around, oops, what's next? There are billions of possibilities, which of them to choose? As a result, I got sick of watching that and I started giving everybody a mandatory plan. Earlier, people would stand up, separate, and say, what's next? They'd putz around, think about something, and the phase is up. Now you have the mirror, food, and your personal goal. You stand up and go carry it out on autopilot. And the fact that you're striving to carry out the first task, then the second, and then the third, that maintains it for you. And the quality of phases during seminars increased substantially, as did their duration, because people began striving to carry out tasks. Meanwhile, here's advice for how to use the plan of action. Say your first task is to go to the mirror. While you're going to the mirror, you're already thinking of your next task. You go up to the mirror, task 1 complete. That's it, you go right for the food. While you're going for the food, you're already thinking of what comes next in your mind. And what you get is this kind of rope. You simply pull yourself along it and you intuitively perform all the necessary actions to keep yourself in the phase. That is, a plan of action is highly necessary for having a high-quality experience. Now look, trying sensory amplification and deepening was mandatory for you all. And now there's one more mandatory thing for tomorrow that I'll require from everybody who enters the phase. That's secondary exit. What does it look like? You come tomorrow and say, I entered the phase, went right for the mirror, and carried out the task. Right then, I was returned back, and we all ask together, and? And you say, I tried to separate again right then to make it to the mirror and so on. Remember, a typical phase is not where you enter it once and are turned back. As a rule, you enter the phase 3 to 4 times in a row. That counts as a single phase. That is, you returned from it and you up and go into action right away as if you had just woken up. Should there be 5 plans? What? Should there be 5 plans or one for all? Actually, it's enough to carry it out once. But at our seminars, so as not to get mixed up, we keep doing the same thing for now. Later, naturally, the task will change, as long as it's not a difficult task. I have experiments that are sometimes exactly the same for months at a time in order to obtain specific data. But why does secondary exit work so often? Because the absolute majority of returns to the body are false ones. The absolute majority. That's what we take advantage of with secondary exit. I can't translocate anywhere. I'm typically returned to my body during translocation. In order to not be returned when translocating with closed eyes, you need to focus your attention on already walking somewhere, for example, around Paris. That is, do it dynamically, not statically. But I try to think I'm being transported right now. Those are different techniques. There's a technique where you close your eyes, focus your attention, and fly. Yes, but I'm often thrown back out instead of flying. But there's a technique where you focus your attention on your sensations. You walk and simply close your eyes, focusing your attention on your being in Paris, for example, or on the moon, and so on. You open your eyes and you're there. Or I'm flying and I fly back to my body. That's a sign of insufficient focus on your destination. It's easier to open a door. The simplest translocation technique is translocation while separating. When you start rolling out, focus your attention on your already being in the place you need. You'll roll out immediately there. Now we have a broad and interesting topic. Which one? Information. Yes, obtaining information in the phase. Tell me, please. What's behind our ability to obtain information from the phase? Tell me all the possibilities and I'll simply list them. The subconscious, say, a field of information. What else? The Akashic records. I don't know what those are, but I'll still put them here. The hologram principle, maybe? Because everything in the universe is also in people. Fine, I don't know what the hologram principle is, but I'll write it down. Now you'll understand why. Why did I write out everything here? In doing so, I wanted to show that regardless of your views of the nature of the phenomenon, if you assume something esoteric and mystical is at the root of this phenomenon, then what is the source of knowledge for you? Fields of information, the Akashic records, and holograms. From your point of view, that's the explanation for the opportunities of the phase. If you're a pragmatist, you think it's the subconscious, the power of the mind, and so on. That is, something very interesting and unique arises. Regardless of how you explain the nature of the given phenomenon, there's an explanation for where information might come from there. That's why we will never be discussing theories. They aren't important. What's important is that it exists, and no matter from which side you approach it, information can be obtained from there. Let's discuss things that are more concrete. Exactly what kind of information there might be. Here's what's most interesting. I'm jumping ahead. How to get it? In fact, that's not so hard a question. And how to verify it? That's also not so hard, provided you have the right approach to the issue of what information might be available there. But before talking about the information itself, I would like to ask you all a question. We'll carry out an experiment. Raise your hand if you think you can find out everything in the phase, that is, there are no limitations. Don't be shy, raise your hands. Okay, thanks. Raise your hand if you think there's some limitation in the phase. 50-50. And now, another question as a follow-up. Say your baseline knowledge is 1. That's all the knowledge and know-how of your brain, your mind, everything you know and know how to do. Your baseline intellect is 1. Tell me, would you refuse a chance to get 2? Not even 2. Would you refuse an offer for a 25% increase in your brain power? A quarter more? Nobody would refuse? That is, that's not so bad to know at least a quarter more. At least by 25%, nobody would refuse. But if, I don't know, you could know 3 times as much, could you imagine knowing twice as much? You can't even imagine it, because you're at the limit of your own knowledge. A small increase, in fact, offers an insane amount of opportunity. Many of you dream of knowing everything. Perhaps everything is possible, but admit it, even if you could double your knowledge in real life, that's not bad, to put it lightly. That's genius level. And now for the most interesting part. I'm quite a pragmatist and a materialist. I try to approach this phenomenon in as down-to-earth a way as possible. Even from my pragmatic viewpoint, our baseline brain power can be increased by at least 1,000 times. And that's the power of the phase. Meanwhile, knowing 25% or 3 times more is not that bad from the most down-to-earth point of view. Your minimum brain power there is about 1,000 times greater than what you know and know how to do now. That resource is so enormous that the main problem using it is not knowing how to use it. It's so enormous, but you approach this issue so primitively that nothing can work out for you because you aren't aware of the sheer magnitude of what you've encountered. That's why difficulties arise, as a rule. Can you explain it using a specific example? Say I know 30 words in Chinese. Using them, will I then be able to know 3,000 words? No, we'll talk about that in just a moment, and you'll clearly realize which direction you went off in. What's most important right now is to understand what exactly this 1,000 includes, what is included in these numbers. I'll give you a few examples, and you yourselves will explain it to me. Say we have a group. Over here we have practitioners who always go off in the wrong direction. As soon as somebody takes up the phase, and I've gone through this, everyone does, they suddenly realize that you can obtain information from the phase or suspect that it's there. And that's where they get the idea of carrying out an experiment. They want to prove to everyone that you can obtain information from the phase. What's the experiment to conduct? Suggest something. Find out the future. Some simple experiment would prove I can find out something there that I don't know in real life. How about finding out what tomorrow's weather will be? Some historical fact, appear in some place. The simplest is to find something at home and then check whether it's there. That is, put some unknown playing card on the dresser, for example, and in the phase you fly there, take a look, and then tell people. So in fact, the experiments that you proposed are of the same type. You'll see in a second. Say a person had a phase encounter and inadvertently obtained information. It worked. He thinks, okay, now I need to prove it in an experiment, and he sets up an experiment with a deck of cards, for example. Until then, it had worked inadvertently, but in completely different circumstances. And he sets up the experiment with playing cards and nothing works. Cards in the phase coincide with real-life ones as chance would predict. They come up with the same probability as if you were to pull them out and read them at random. Sure, many people may tell you they can do it. For some, it supposedly has worked. Believe me, as soon as it comes to real experiments so somebody can prove something, all those people disappear somewhere. And now another group of people, a specific case from a seminar. Somehow, I don't remember how many years ago, at least 2 or 3 years ago, a young man, an engineer, had taken it up. And he talked about this specific situation in his life. He had worked, perhaps still does, at a company that makes robotic artificial limbs. They had a task. They needed to make their own version of a foreign-made artificial limb, but at a fraction of the cost. They had a hand and needed to insert all the parts into it. The main task was for each phalange of the robotic hand to be controlled separately. Even our own fingers are controlled from here by the tendons. That's why we can't bend our phalanges separately as a rule. Their task was for each phalange to be controlled separately. They had small motors, special joints that needed to be inserted into those fingers. The problem was that all of the mechanisms that they used apparently didn't fit together, which was clear even from a passing glance. I think he said there were about 5 people, and they couldn't do it because the parts didn't fit. That is, they couldn't put in those joints however they tried. Their inputs didn't allow them to insert those joints and those little motors into each phalange separately. And he told us how he entered the phase, and I don't remember exactly, but I think he opened some cabinet there and found the prototype hand that he had been looking for. He looked at how everything had been done on it, and he brought in a prototype hand with working fingers to show the class. And he says, us engineers, we tried to make this but couldn't. I looked in the phase and found a prototype hand and recreated it. Here it is. In real life, we had been unable to do it. Now tell me, where's the difference? Moreover, I can give you a ton of such cases and tell you about these people over here and those people over there. Goal setting. What? Goal setting. And what's the difference between those goals? In that one, he imagined it and it was already there. He worked backwards, as it were. Belief. No, that could have been in real life too. Those people believed too. The same could have been done in real life too. They simply hadn't gotten there yet. He used the power of his own mind, actually, based on all his accumulated experience, and that's how he created a prototype. But how to determine whether the information he obtained had already been in his brain? Therein lies the key, in fact. There was already some prototype there, and you think it over both in real life and outside real life, in the phase, that is. And you hit upon the idea in the phase naturally. In fact, that's not exactly right. You'll see why in a second. What's the difference between this approach and that one? Some people do something to achieve something, or to find out how to achieve it themselves. Meanwhile, others want everything at once, for the phase to tell them some combination to a safe. Another difference is that there's a test there. Closer, closer. That is, what did they do? They're just testing. They tried to test whether it's possible. And what are these people doing? These people are striving right for an outcome. Look, it's all quite simple. The problem is with abstract tasks. What makes the situation so comical? You set yourself the task of carrying out some experiment to prove it's all possible, and you set some abstract and unnecessary goals that don't pan out. People have been carrying out such experiments for years. Moreover, they'll always be carried out from generation to generation. But over here, a person sets himself the specific essential task of obtaining information immediately. And it starts to work. And the paradox lies in the fact that everything included in that 1,000 is all you really need. What do you really need? What information? What should it be about? What do you need in life? Health. What else? Knowledge. Well, what knowledge? What should it be about? Personal life. What else? Work, study, creativity. Where to find lots of clients. That's also work. We'll put that under work. Look, everything you really need, real-life goals that are really necessary in everyday life, not invented, abstract ones where it's not clear who needs them or for what. But what you really need, that's all included in that 1,000. That's all really within reach. It all really works. And that's an amazing paradox. When you set some abstract goals, nothing works. If you go right for your necessary goal, for one that's really necessary, then everything works. Example number 2. People often say, that means I won't find out the last name of some guy named Julio who lives in Honduras on street XYZ, like a TV psychic. That means I won't be able to find that out in the phase. I won't be able to obtain this or that information. That's when I ask, but in real life, why do you need to know the last name of Julio who lives on street XYZ in Honduras? After all, that's not what you need in your life. What you need in your life are work, study, creativity, personal relationships, and so on. Health. And that's what you'll really use. And the paradox is that that's all included in the information available in the phase. Everything we really need is there. If you wisely choose the information to be obtained from the very beginning, far fewer difficulties will arise. If you choose some abstract goals for yourself, you'll encounter enormous problems or might become totally disappointed. And now, let's talk about how exactly you can obtain information in the phase. Ask for it. Yes, yesterday we discussed the easiest method, an animate object. You simply enter the phase and ask somebody. Ideally, the object has some tie to the information being obtained. What else? I had a case where I entered the phase for the first time. I wanted to get in touch with somebody, but I still didn't know how. I saw a landline. I picked up the phone and called. Yes, that works. Inanimate objects, that is, phase objects, using something. Right, something. That's books, notes, and the internet, for example. My girlfriend told me she turned on the television and watched it on TV. Yes, you change channels until you find the one you need. There's good reason I talked about the internet. When I first took up the phase, I didn't even have a computer. One didn't materialize until I was writing my first book. Of course, there was no internet access. I didn't even really understand what the internet was. And naturally, I used the computer in the phase. I went through folders, found the files I needed, and so on. Let's put it another way. The phase is promoted as an alternative to the virtual world, among other things. What do people do here? They sit from morning to evening at their keyboard on the internet. They say, that's it, time for bed, time to enter the phase. They lie down, leave their body, and again it's back to the keyboard, Google, and they ask for the answers they need. And it really works. Even at seminars, that's been talked about several times. Inanimate objects. What else? How else may information be obtained in the phase? You may, instead of talking to somebody or reading about something, enter a situation you want to find out about. That is, the episode technique. For example, you've lost something, and focus your attention on that object. You're brought to it, and you see where you could have lost it. Or some situation happened with somebody, and you want to know exactly what happened. And you enter that very situation and see what might have happened there. There's something I underappreciated for a long time, and in doing so probably made another mistake. Literally a few years ago, I realized that one of the most interesting ideas escaped me for a long time. I had always considered the presence of some object necessary for obtaining information in the phase, because a stable object is more manageable, as it were, and obtaining information from it is seemingly easier. And other methods in which I don't come into direct contact with the phase space seemed inferior to me, because I didn't see or touch anything. It seemed to me it was all wrong, that it was all hard to control. But in fact, there's another way to obtain information. Consider all the previous techniques to be go-betweens. Look, we've listed what the source of information might be, right? And it turns out that the techniques are interpreters of sorts that translate into a language that we understand. You're talking with a person, and he's been created by some unknown source, or he's some entity, but he's speaking in a language we understand about things we understand. It's the same if it's written in a book. Somebody wrote that book. How else did the text get there? That is, what am I getting at? You can find out directly, that is, obtaining information right from the source. Any ideas as to how to do that? That's how it always goes for me anyway. How exactly? I set myself the challenge of finding my teacher. While I didn't find him, his voice was there. I would have a question, and a voice would respond to me, provide an answer, and show video clips. Okay, regarding the voice, that's also an interesting thing. Overall, it's hard to describe it. Why? You ask yourself a question regarding yourself, as it were. At that moment, you either hear an answer or you get the feeling you were told it, but realize you didn't hear anything. Right, and I often get the feeling of telepathic communication because there are no words and the information is felt non-verbally. Yes, meanwhile, you might get the feeling that somebody told you. That is, you understand nobody told you, but the feeling somebody told you is real. Or recall what you ate for dinner yesterday. You can recall any information you need in the phase in just the same way. That is, you try to recall something that you don't in fact know, but you try to recall it and you recall it as if you actually knew it. And so, directly obtaining information is unique in that you can get it straight from the source. Moreover, it's much faster, naturally, and most importantly, and Yaroslav talked about this, and what amazed me almost the most is that the direct information channel is much wider. In order to use an animate object, you need to be in the phase space with the created objects. But remember, we said that if you've just woken up, you're already in the phase. Yes, the phase is not well formed, the space is not there, but you're in the phase. That is, it turns out that the channel is open, and what amazed me the most was that obtaining information directly works not only in the phase itself, but both before and after the phase. That is, you're returned back, you lie in this transitional state, and you can easily continue obtaining information. That is, the space is not well formed. Perhaps because it's not well formed, it might work even better. That is, in that situation, you continue to use the phase even when you're returned from it. That is, in a transitional state. Here we recall all kinds of various stories of breakthroughs when in sub-waking states, while falling asleep, awakening, napping, and relaxing. That's precisely when ideas often come. And here, we see that the phase is much broader and can definitely tie in to all this. That is, directly obtaining information is unique in that it works even when you haven't separated, but you're lying in your body, as it were, but are at the same time nonetheless in the phase. And now, what is it mandatory for us to discuss in the context of obtaining information? How to verify it, of course. Excuse me, does anybody have bottled water? I won't drink it, I just need a bottle with water in it. There you are, thanks. What's your name? Anatella. Tell me, what does Anatella have in her bottle? Water. Why, have you tried it? Vodka. Yaroslav thinks it's vodka, but we don't know. We're assuming, of course, but there might even be vodka in here. We're in Russia, after all. Moreover, I said I won't be trying it. Anatella immediately brightened up after finding out nobody would try it, and then handed over her bottle. In the phase, for example, I found a bottle with liquid. I tried it. Water. I put it out to the side and thought, but maybe it's vodka. I bring it up and smell it immediately. I tasted it and tried the effect, which can continue into real life. We'll talk about that more tomorrow in the context of self-healing. But what's the point here? Look, we talked about how in a deep phase, levitating might not work. You might not walk through the wall there. It's just as hard as in real life. But water easily turns into vodka. Tell me, why? Because you yourself are having an influence. But why can't I influence the wall? Information transmits better through a liquid. Look, we're not coming into contact with differences in properties right now. And that's why the wall's outwardly stable, like all the space around. However, we aren't interacting with the differences between water and vodka, the smell, the taste, and so on. That's actually one of the fundamental properties of the phase, why we can easily translocate through a door when it's closed. We go to the door and the space behind it is unstable. We aren't interacting with it, and that's why we can translocate whenever we want using the door technique. It's the same with the water in the given case. Inasmuch as we don't come into contact with a difference, we're not hooked onto the differences with our sensations. And that's why we can relatively easily change water into vodka and so on. What does that have to do with obtaining information? You've found some object and are communicating with it. The object itself is outwardly stable, like this liquid. It's stable, you can see it, you can feel it and scrutinize it. It's absolutely authentic, an absolutely ideally created object. No computer program can render such a detailed person. After all, he has his own behavior, that is, the complexity of the object is thousands and even millions of times that of any computer program. In an instant, your internal brain power creates a super space that has its own behavior that fully complies with the laws of physics and so on. Now then, the object looks real and you start to talk to it, and you have doubts. There's something you're afraid to find out. Or you want something to be a certain way, the way you want. And these doubts arise that turn water into vodka. That is, you can influence an object. It might say what you want or what you don't want, what you're afraid of. As a result, the object's fully formed, but due to your mistakes, your inadvertent influence on it, the information starts distorting. As a result, when talking to an object, there's no guarantee that you'll get reliable information. You'll have to know some ways to ensure you get the information you need and ensure its truthfulness. Tell me, how do we figure out whether or not information is true? Ask again? We'll put it all in one group, linguistic tricks. Ask the question again, rephrase the question. That is, if you are told something, take exactly the same question and ask it again. To your surprise, with a straight face, the object might give the exact opposite answer in just a few seconds. What's that a sign of? Not completely true information. Right, you did something wrong. And you need to be careful with trusting such information. It might be false. What else can be done? Use an alternative method for obtaining the same information. An alternative method of obtaining information. That is, you tried one method for obtaining information, and then you tried another to get the same answer. What else? Try to ask a test question, that is, some basic question. For example, what's my name, or how old am I? Watch how an object reacts to basic questions. There might also be follow-up questions. After all, you're not at a fortune teller's. You can ask, but why? That is, ask for evidence that everything is really so, right when obtaining information. Or ask a follow-up question. And one more thing, the most important one. Regardless of what your tests indicate, before using information in real life, especially if it means doing something serious, try in real life to verify the information you obtained. So you don't find yourself in some stupid situation. I've seen many such examples. Real-life verification. What's the probability of answers being true? You know, results can vary a lot. If you go the wrong route, they'll all be wrong. Absolutely all of them, no matter what you do. For example, you have a serious question and you go and grab an object saying, "You better start talking, it'll probably go silent." And even if it does say something, then you're pressuring it, and excessive desire will force it to remain silent or say something untrue. So do everything as if it didn't matter to you, as if in passing. I can't give you even a general accuracy percentage because that's impossible. It depends on what information it is and how you do it. However, if you try to obtain specific and needed information, there's a very high level of probability that you'll be able to do it immediately. Please note, specific and necessary information. The more abstract your question, the more abstract the answer you'll get. I can even give you some examples. For example, what's an abstract question? What's the meaning of my life? That's an abstract question. That is, I know of many stories where people are looking for answers to some abstract and made-up question. That kind of question has no relevance to real life, practical matters, and so on. Here's another example. There's a masculine and feminine approach to obtaining information. The feminine approach is, what's waiting for me in the future? What's in my future? The masculine approach is, how do I obtain a specific goal? How do I do that in the future? Obviously, I'm on the masculine side, and so I advise you to pursue goals. Maybe I'm just throwing around labels when it comes to the masculine and feminine approach, but still, pursuing a goal is the better path. That is, it's better to strive to accomplish some task than try to learn some abstract answer from your future. Look, the topic is very interesting. In fact, we've only touched the tip of the iceberg here. If you're interested, there's a new version of the textbook. It goes into a little more detail on the topic and some new developments. It's one of the most fascinating topics, and it may well motivate you. That is, as soon as tomorrow, you can try out something from this field, and that will be additional motivation to enter the phase tomorrow. What's our main task? We're now going to practice awakening, simulating it. There's this one secret here. Look, yesterday we discussed aggressively entering the phase no matter what, intensely. That is, we literally broke into it and did all the techniques, literally, no matter what, by concentrating on our actions. In fact, there's another alternative. If you're unable to enter the phase at full speed, intensely and aggressively, then you may enter using the quite interesting technique of forced falling asleep. It's simulating falling asleep or forcing yourself to fall asleep. Abrupt relaxation is also similar. The idea is that instead of a standalone technique or together with techniques, you act as if you wanted to fall asleep. If an aggressive approach doesn't get results, then performing actions as if one wanted to fall asleep will substantially improve your success rate. First, let's practice forced falling asleep, and then we'll include it in our procedure, and then we'll practice everything together. So close your eyes. On the count of 3, in the most literal way possible, try to abruptly fall asleep. 1, 2, 3, fall asleep. Fall asleep, fall asleep. Right now you want to abruptly fall asleep, to sink into sleep. Fall asleep, fall asleep, fall asleep, fall asleep. Done. Do nothing. Please note there's no need to get lost in thought, no need to analyze. In the most literal sense, try to abruptly fall asleep or abruptly relax. It's similar to abrupt relaxation. 1, 2, 3, fall asleep. Sink into sleep right now. Fall asleep, fall asleep, fall asleep. Done. Do nothing. As a standalone technique, it is performed for literally a few seconds. 1, 2, 3, fall asleep. Fall asleep, fall asleep, sink. Try to abruptly fall asleep right now. Done. During a real attempt at using forced falling asleep upon awakening, it's important not to fall asleep, as it's very easy to fall asleep for real. So you catch that last just a bit more and I'll fall asleep moment. At that moment you can either separate or the technique will start to work. That is, try not to miss it, because you can fall asleep in a moment. 1, 2, 3, fall asleep. Done. Do nothing. This technique's unique. The point is that as soon as you run into problems, say techniques don't work, or you aren't able to separate, or you're unable to separate completely at any difficult moment, add forced falling asleep in parallel to your actions or as a standalone technique, and the problem will be solved right there. Mainly thanks to forced falling asleep a few years ago, I was able to improve the success rate upon awakening from 70% to nearly 100%. That is, in those cases when aggression and intensity don't help, I begin to do all the actions as if falling asleep right then. Then everything starts working after doing it intensely didn't work. 1, 2, 3, fall asleep. Literally try to fall asleep now. Done. Do nothing. Recall a situation when you needed to get some sleep, but time was short, but you definitely had to get some sleep. And you lie down for that half an hour or 20 minutes and try to fall asleep abruptly. 1, 2, 3, fall asleep. Done. Do nothing. The main thing is not to fall asleep. This is a simulation of falling asleep, the first step of falling asleep. You shouldn't fall asleep for real. It's as if you trick your brain. It thinks, we're sleeping. Well, all right, and kicks back into the right state. 1, 2, 3, fall asleep. Done. Relax. In class, I discovered the effectiveness of this method in these symptomatic situations that constantly happen. A person comes in and talks about how he or she tried to do something, cycled techniques, and nothing worked. Then, he or she usually says, I decided to simply fall asleep in order to try again the next time. And then once he or she decided to fall asleep, everything starts to happen. Once on the forum, I read a post by a guy about how he understood forced falling asleep. He read about it in a textbook, watched the video seminar, and tried, but nothing worked. Here he describes the situation when he tried forced falling asleep again, but nothing worked. That's when, he says, I decided to just fall asleep seeing as nothing was working, and right then it worked, and right then I realized that it was simply necessary to try to fall asleep without falling asleep. That is, no need to go off the beaten path. We just practiced standalone use of forced falling asleep as a technique. You can do it that way too. For example, instead of rotation, instead of hand visualization, you can simulate falling asleep for a few seconds. But you will have a somewhat different task. Last night, we did everything intensely. Tonight, you will continue intensely and aggressively no matter what, but only if you fall asleep all the time, because you need intensity. In all other cases, you'll do it the exact opposite way. All attempts should be carried out while performing forced falling asleep in parallel. Now imagine you've come home at midnight. Set your alarm for 6 a.m. and you go to bed thinking, I'll fall asleep now, and simply try to have a good night's sleep until the alarm. But if I do wake up, I can try to enter the phase. Meanwhile, keep your plan of action in mind. Deepening is mandatory, secondary exit is mandatory. Gradually fall asleep with that thought. You've woken up. The mirror, and as if falling asleep, try to appear at the mirror. That is, try to touch and scrutinize it, and it's as if you're falling asleep to that. It didn't work. Now try to levitate and fall asleep at the same time. That is, try to levitate passively as if abruptly relaxing and levitating. Try to get up. Try to get up, and it's as if you try to fall asleep at the same time. Try to roll out to the left and to the right, falling asleep. Pull to the left and try to fall asleep at the same time. Pull to the right after your eyes and try to fall asleep at the same time. It didn't work. Rotation. Try to spin to the left. Meanwhile, fall asleep and try to rotate. Sink into sleep. Sink. It's like abrupt relaxation. Abruptly relax and try to fall asleep. It doesn't work. Swimming technique. Imagine you're swimming out in the sea and try to fall asleep at the same time. Swim, swim, and fall asleep as if the swimming technique were a falling asleep technique. Move your arms, try to go to sleep, to swim to sleep. It doesn't work. Rotation. Try again to rotate to the left. Pull to the left after your eyes and try to fall asleep at the same time. Pull, pull, fall asleep, fall asleep, fall asleep, sink, fall asleep, deeper, deeper, deeper. It doesn't work. The swimming technique again. Swim to sleep. Swim and try to fall asleep. It's as if it worked. You're swimming somewhere. Now imagine where you'll go for the mirror. Now there's intensity, no passivity or falling asleep. As soon as something works, activate your intensity and plan of action. Where you'll go, what you'll do. Imagine how you'll try deepening. Imagine you've appeared somewhere on an island. How to carry out your plan, how to deepen. Say you've been returned back, and another secondary exit works immediately. Then you're returned back again and secondary exit doesn't work anymore. You're lying down and think, great, now I'll fall asleep. I'll wake up and try again. And you fall asleep again with that thought. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Meanwhile, don't forget that if you suddenly realize you're asleep in a dream, that's already the phase. The plan of action is the same. Wake up, the mirror, and try to fall asleep at the same time. Try to appear at the mirror, touch it, scrutinize it, and touch it, and try to fall asleep at the same time. That is, it's as if you try to fall asleep at the mirror. Levitation. Try to levitate and fall asleep. Meanwhile, pull up, and it's as if you're trying to fall asleep. Try to stand up. To fall asleep and stand up at the same time. Roll out to the right. Try to roll to the right and fall asleep. Try to fall asleep and at the same time pull to the right and to the left. Try to roll out to the side. It doesn't seem to work. Hand visualization. Rub your hands. Try to see them and fall asleep at the same time. It's as if you abruptly relax and try to feel and see your hands at the same time. It doesn't work. The deepening technique. Walk around the room, touch everything, scrutinize, and it's as if you're falling asleep at the same time. It doesn't work. Hand visualization again. Rub your hands and try to fall asleep to it. Fall asleep and rub your hands at the same time. It doesn't work. Deepening. Imagine you're walking around the room, touch and scrutinize everything, and at the same time try to fall asleep to it. Touch, scrutinize, fall asleep, and fall asleep at the same time, as if going to sleep. It doesn't work. Hand visualization again. Rub your hands and fall asleep at the same time. It's as if your hands have appeared. Separation again, intensely now. The technique worked. No more passivity or falling asleep. Do everything aggressively. Try to stand up. Picture your plan of action in your mind, where you'll go, what you'll do, and how you'll deepen. And don't forget about secondary exit. As soon as you've returned to the body, try to leave it again. Carry out deepening in parallel to your plan of action. In your mind's eye, picture where you'll go and what you'll do. The alarm had suddenly gone off, and you've woken up. You've walked around for several minutes and read your notes. You've recalled your plan of action. Perhaps you've even eaten something. You've gone back to sleep with the intention of waking up and entering the phase upon awakening. You fall asleep with that thought. I will now be giving just two cues. The cue, "You've awoken," and the cue, "It worked." You cycle through your own techniques on your own and do everything while trying to fall asleep. What's most important is to do it on your own using forced falling asleep the whole time. Sleep, sleep, sleep. You've awoken. Do techniques and try to fall asleep at the same time. It worked. Intensely now, separation. Picture your plan of action in your mind's eye. You've tried deepening and secondary exit. You've been returned back to reality and you can't do anything anymore. You think, excellent, now I'll fall asleep, wake up, and try again. You fall asleep again with that thought. One more piece of advice. Forced falling asleep is applied in any situation when something doesn't work. If techniques don't work, force falling asleep. If separation doesn't work, force falling asleep. Indeed, the interplay of intensity and passivity, that is, either aggressively no matter what or falling asleep, can bring a near 100% success rate upon awakening. But today, we'll do everything together with forced falling asleep, in order to understand what it is. Those who always fall asleep during the attempts are the exception. If you fall asleep during attempts the whole time, then of course you need to do them intensely. Sleep, sleep, sleep. You've awoken. Do everything on your own and together with forced falling asleep. It worked. Separation, your plan of action in your head. Deepening, how you'll do a secondary exit. It's as if everything worked for you. You're returned back. You're lying down, you think, excellent, now I'll fall asleep and try again. You fall asleep with that thought. Sleep, sleep. It's very important not to fall asleep when using forced falling asleep. You need to simulate the initial stage of falling asleep, and then interrupt it and do intense actions until a technique works. Remember the chart on phase entry probability? Using forced falling asleep, you kick back to maximum probability. That's why, as soon as something works, subsequent actions are intense. Sleep, sleep, sleep. You've awoken. It worked. Separation techniques, plan of action. deepening in parallel. A secondary exit when you're returned back. It's as if everything worked for you. You're returned back, and you think, excellent, I'll fall asleep again, and try again. You fall asleep with that thought. You gradually start to fall asleep. You've awoken. Try to fall asleep at that goddamn mirror. Try to separate and fall asleep at the same time. Technique 1, and fall asleep at the same time. Technique 2, and fall asleep at the same time. It's as if Technique 2 worked. Run through separation and subsequent actions in your mind. And now you've been returned back to your body. You don't want to sleep anymore, so it's as if you've gotten up and walked around. The time is 9 a.m., for example. Somewhere around 11, you've decided to take a nap. After all, class is at 1, you still have half an hour to nap. So at 11, you go back to bed. It's a daytime nap in order to try to wake up and try again. The very last time before going to the seminar. At 11, you go back to sleep. You've awoken. It's as if you try to sink there, alongside the techniques, alongside your actions. It's as if you try to abruptly relax alongside the techniques and your actions. It worked. Run through your plan of action in your head, where you'll go, what you'll do, deepening. That is, everything's the same except you try to fall asleep to the techniques. And now for contrast, we'll do techniques so you understand what intensely and falling asleep mean. Say the rotation technique. To the left, intensely, aggressively, and no matter what, try to rotate. Turn your eyes to the left. Try to spin to the left. Pull, pull, pull to the left. Try to spin no matter what. Now to the right side, but falling asleep. Fall right asleep, as if also pulling to the right. You want to fall asleep to it. To the left, intensely, aggressively, and no matter what, try to spin. To the right, falling asleep. Try no matter what to fall asleep and spin to the right. Visualization of the hands. Rub your hands and try no matter what to see, hear, and feel them. Rub your hands right before your eyes, about 4 inches or even a little more above eye level. Rub your hands faster, intensively, and try to scrutinize them. Now the same thing, but fall asleep. Try to see your hands and fall asleep to them. Rub your hands intensely. Try no matter what to see, scrutinize, and feel them. Where are my hands? They're in front of me after all. Why can't I see them or hear them? Rub your hands even faster. Now, rubbing your hands while falling asleep, it's as if you try to fall asleep at the same time. Rub your hands. Try to fall asleep to it. So, fall asleep, sink, sink. Try to feel your hands at the same time. The swimming technique. Swim intensely, quickly. Try to feel the movement of your hands, body, and head. Swim faster. As if you're really swimming but don't feel your body for some reason. Swim even faster. Now the same thing, but falling asleep, as if you're swimming to sleep. Now swim fast, intensely, aggressively, and no matter what. Try to feel yourself swimming even faster, even more intensely. Now the same thing, falling asleep. Swim and try to fall asleep at the same time. Deepening. Walk around the room intensely, touch everything, scrutinize, and try to pour yourself into the room. This is one of the best techniques, but it only worked once today. Try to feel everything intensely and aggressively. Scrutinize, peer in. Try to pour yourself into the room. Now the same thing, but falling asleep. Try to relax and fall asleep at the same time. As if falling into the dream world, scrutinize everything there and try to zone out at the same time. Walk intensely, aggressively, touch everything, scrutinize. Try to touch everything and scrutinize everything, especially the small details of objects from a close distance. Try to feel yourself in the room. Activate as many sensations as possible, vestibular, tactile, and visual sensations. Movement to the max. Now the same thing, but falling asleep. Relax, do nothing. By the way, indirect techniques are performed when the body is in any position. It's not mandatory to fall asleep on your back, for example. Look, this forced falling asleep maneuver, it's key for getting the highest possible success rate upon awakening. In any situation where something isn't working, separation isn't working, techniques or whatever else aren't working, as a rule, if you add forced falling asleep, everything will start to work. You fall down on this chart, but when you do forced falling asleep, you're returned back here. This is well illustrated by the technique of phantom wiggling. It's this technique where you try to move your real arm without tensing a muscle. Not an imagined arm, but the one lying at your side. Without tensing a muscle, you try to move it. Initially, let's say you try to move it with force and aggression, but it lies there and doesn't move. Then, as if you're falling asleep, you up and press down on that arm at the same time. It starts to move right there, and you're in the phase. That's upon awakening naturally. If you do it like that right now, the technique won't work. Although even with the direct method, adding forced falling asleep will substantially improve your success rate. That is, as soon as something doesn't work, you start to do it not intensely or aggressively, but as if you were falling asleep, and it will start working right then. That is, depending on the situation, your task is always to change it up. Add intensity here and do it as if you're falling asleep there. But tomorrow it's to be done intensely only by those who always fall asleep on their side. Everybody else, do the techniques with forced falling asleep. Thanks for coming. We're meeting tomorrow at 1. Make a lot of attempts for me.